All right, and I'll just kind of just have some questions here and everything. Kind of just like I said in Wormy, just a conversation between you guys and our audience here. One thing that when I was talking with you guys, it was actually it's Chris, was one of the more interesting things that you mentioned was the use of weather and GDUs for weed management and adjusting planting depth as well. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Sure. So when we start out planting, we usually are looking for a certain window in which there's obviously the ground temp is going to reach a certain target based on forecasts and where it's at. But also, and cloud cover can play into that as well. But we're usually looking for, an emergence on that corn plant that can get out of the ground, ideally within, 4 to maybe 10 days if we're pushing early in the spring. So, that's one of the things that we look for. And then we base a lot of our planning on how many acres we plant per day, because we generally won't necessarily plant as many acres as we can. We'll plant as many acres as we think we can get, a blind pass done in the window that's in front of us. So, if we know that there's a rain coming, well, nobody ever knows it's the weather, but if there's forecasted rain coming, 7 to 8 days from now, and our GDU model says that plant's going to be, it's going to be out of the ground 7 to 8 days, then that means we can do that blind pass at day 6 and be okay, right ahead of that rain. So, maybe that's not optimal always, but it's still better than, having it come out of, rain and then not be able to do that blind pass and have to resort to other tools. So we will basically feed the forecast into a model that gives us forward GDUs and projected emergence and a projected, growth stages of that corn, and then use that for our planning and when we make certain passes. I guess the tool that we use, there's a few different websites that you can do that. I actually just put it into a spreadsheet, and I use Power BI, but a spreadsheet can work too for that.
All right.
For people, I guess, that aren't familiar with GDUs, basically it's the idea that you take the high and the low of the day, and you average that, and then you subtract 50 from that. So if the high is 80 and the low is 60, your average is 70, you got 20 GDUs for that day. And typically it takes about 120 to 150 GDUs to get 120 to 130 is probably a good number to estimate that if you're planting 3 inches deep, that's about what, or 2.5, 3 inches deep, that's what it'll take for it to get close to emergence or emerge. So a lot of times we're looking to do that blind pass at about 80 GDUs, 80 to 100.
Okay.
And you still gotta get out and walk those fields because there's variation and all that.
Yep. So then do you use, sorry if I missed it, do you use like your own temperature on the farm and everything, or like a weather station nearby, or how do you kind of figure that out?
Yeah, I just use a weather station nearby for that type of stuff. I will get out and probe fields. We have a lot of, there's variations in soil texture, and that's going to drive variation in those results too. So that's where we have a system where we keep notes on all that, and we kind of get a feel for some of those differentiations, but being very attuned to it, I think, is the key.
All right. Yeah.
Take lots of notes.
Yeah. And speaking on notes, Matthew, I know when we were talking, it's come up here on the chat. You want to talk about that whiteboard planning tool you use to kind of for when you're working with gap analysis and tax management. I thought that was pretty pretty interesting, and I think more people would be interested in learning more about and potentially implementing that on their own farms.
Yeah. Ty, are you able to pull that slide up with the image of the whiteboard?
I think Cole has that up there right now.
Great. So I'll give the background to it as that's being pulled up. This is my $1 million idea that everyone on the call can get for free. So there you go. He said you didn't get anything out of the conference. This is it. So the background to this whiteboard was in last winter. I have a friend who's a data analyst, and we sat down and said, what single factor has the biggest impact on yield on our farm? And so we tried to look at every variable we could think of, like crop rotation, variety selection, rainfall, the soil productivity index of particular fields, the number of years of organic, and we also included the number of passes. So where we cross the field 5 times in a growing season or 15, and then the frequency of passes. So between that planting date and that blind pass, or between the blind pass and the rotary hoe pass or the cultivator pass, was it 4 days or 6 days or 7 days? And what we found in crunching all the numbers, looking back 3 years, was the number one factor impacting yield was the frequency of passes. Said differently, if you're in a garden and you're weeding every day, you're probably going to have a better garden. So the conclusion was not rocket science by any means. I think that's something that most farmers could tell you right off the bat. But what we found on our own farm was there was gaps between what we said we were going to do or what our expectations were and what we actually did. And that was happening for a couple of reasons. Maybe it rained when we weren't expecting it, like Chris mentioned. And so you got rained out of a field and it took you longer to get back. Or maybe you've got a field with a grumpy neighbor and nobody wants to go over there and cultivate the field because that guy's always out there giving you a hard time. For whatever reason, on different farms, there were gaps between what we wanted to do and what we said we'd do. And so this whiteboard became a really lo-fi way to visualize the work that was being done and the work that we anticipated needing to do. And so, left to right, each little square represents a single day, and then top to bottom represents a different field. And then the different colors represent different activities, a black color for tillage, green for planting, blue for time weeding, so on and so forth. And so really quickly and really easily, we were able to visualize what's going on the farm, what do we need to be doing, and where are we kind of falling behind. So this is just a super simple management tool that's as low tech as it gets. You could do this on a chalkboard, you could do it on a piece of paper, you could do it on a Google spreadsheet. But for us, a whiteboard worked well because we could easily manipulate it, erase stuff, put indicators on it. The whole team could walk in the door of the shop and see what's going on. So that whiteboard is now turned into a mobile app that we're developing on our farm. So we're going to turn this concept of management into a tool that you can keep in your phone or on a website. And it will also include things like your records. So when you do your annual certification, you can quickly generate a report that says, here's what I've done, here's what happened on this field, and include things like clean out records, tracking weather, other kinds of things. So we're in the process of turning this into an app. And if anyone's interested in it, you can go to tryfarmflow.com. It's free, and we're going to look for people to try it out this next year and see if it's helpful for others. But the whiteboard is free, and you can use it as much as you want. So that's the idea.
All right. So did you catch anything like you were doing as much or something you're doing too much? Anything surprising came up about this with that, Matthew, or?
I'd be curious to see what Chris and Barry and Jack would all say, but I would say the first 14 or first 21 days, the first 3 weeks after planting are the most important. And if we did a good job in those first 2 weeks, not that you could slack off for the rest of the season, but like if you nailed those first 2 weeks, you're going to be okay. And if you mess up or the weather screws you up, you might want to erase that whiteboard and start over.
All right, thank you. Yeah, speaking about, we're kind of going to go from something low tech to kind of a nice little whiteboard to something probably it's top of the end tech and lasers and and whatnot. So Barry, you want to talk about that weed zapper a little bit more and detail, kind of explain the process of acquiring it and what you see the future holds with it.
Sure. Can you hear me good, or am I getting a lot of feedback? So we had contacted this company probably 2 years ago. You know, I honestly had always thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if we could just shoot these weeds with lasers? And I kind of envisioned shooting a big plant and just wiping it out, more similar to the zapper. And so honestly, I was always searching, just Googling all the time to try to find if there was companies doing this or finding this. So when we found this company, they didn't have any models out and available yet. They were going to have one at a farm show in California that we went to. And their first rendition of their laser weeder was a completely autonomous 8-foot wide machine used mostly in the vegetable world. Well, it wasn't used anywhere, but that's what they envisioned it being used at. And as they started visiting with farmers, you know, the guys that came up with this are tech guys with minimal ag background. And so they have a variety of farmers now that they've been working with. But one of the first things that everybody said was,
Taylor.
there yet? Okay. I mean, one of the first things everybody said was, hey, forget about the autonomous thing. Like, we all have tractors. Like, you guys can shoot weeds with lasers. Why don't you focus on that? We'll put it on a tractor. So then this is the first model that they came up with. And last year was the first year, I believe, that they had actually sold any and put them out. And I believe they sold 50 of them last year. I think this was number 13 that came out. They're being manufactured right now in Michigan, and they use a CO2 laser tube currently in them. So it puts shoots the light down the tube, and then in the back they use essentially mirrors that direct the laser down to the ground to the weed. So they have a row of predict cameras at the front, and then another row of hit cameras towards the back. And probably one of the most unique things that they have is they have the software to actually do that and hit the center of the plant. So we've ran Hotson-Bickler guidance, cultivator hitches, and almost all those cameras, you pull your measurements, you put everything in, and if you tilt your 3-point and throw the measurement off, I mean, everything's off just a little bit. So somehow, beyond my expertise, they have the programming that your field goes up and down, your rows are at different heights, you can be on a ridge or not on a ridge, and it still accurately hits the meristem of the plant. One other thing that it does throughout the field, I mean, it's obviously taking pictures all the time. So it'll give you stand counts, it'll give you a map of where your weed pressure is in your field. It's a crop scouting tool that is slow but very thorough. I see there's a question on how much power does the laser take. Currently with the CO2 lasers, I think that it's a 65 kW generator that we have on the front of the tractor. Again, the technology is changing rapidly on lasers and power usage. So, it's a relatively small amount of power compared to the weed zapper, but it's controlled differently. And the more power you have and can run through a laser, I mean, either the faster you can go or the more burn time you get on a weed. So um, depending on what your weed is uh, and the size of the weed, you know, your burn time dictates how fast it goes. I mean, it's still fractions of seconds, but it still makes a difference. Um, yeah. So uh, again, I think you know this is something that more and more row crop farms are going to be interested in, whether it's you know partnering, kind of like the weed zapper thing started out. You know, maybe it's not something everyone can start with, but you know certainly we have a lot of H2A crews that are out there that people share and rotate around, and you know we just see this as the same tool. And kind of to Matthew's point, I mean, your first 3 weeks absolutely are the most critical. And my vision of shooting a big weed with a laser, you know, was just a vision I had. And then when I see this and I'm like, oh, it's little weeds. You know, it doesn't work very good on the big weeds. But then again, where are our problems? It's the little weeds that come up with our crop in those first times. Like, you know, again, if you go into week 3 or 4 of your crop being up and you don't have any weeds in your seed line, just, you know, I mean, that's incredible. Um, and even if you're hand weeding, you don't have pinpoint accuracy with a hoe or pulling a weed or any of those other things. It does eliminate a fair amount of the weather concerns. I think I mentioned before, I mean, we literally ran it while it was raining out here at night. So, according to my son, you want to have a good Netflix subscription. It does have its own Wi-Fi. So, there are things that you need to have in place, but nothing difficult. So, um, yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions. I see how often do you have to replace the CO2 canisters? So they're supposed to have a 5,000 hour runtime. We did replace 2 of them this first year. So in about 500 hours, they Carbon Robotics covered the replacement cost of them. In fact, they had a site mechanic. There's 2 machines in our area in Colorado here, and they had a full-time employee out here just making sure that everything was going right. We had 1 breaker, electrical breaker, that we had problems with, but nothing else went wrong. I think the CO2 lasers are about $2,500 a piece. So if you had to replace them further down the road, that's approximately where they would be. But that's the other thing. If you got, you know, even 2,500 hours out of not having to replace anything, there's 0 wear points on this. You're not dragging a sweep through the field. You know, potentially as the technology advances, you know, they think that they're going to get up to lasers with 30,000 hours on them. And you know, there's, like I said, there's definitely upcoming advancements just in the laser world itself. See, there's a question on how we'll use the machine in 2024. Yeah, we again don't plan to do any blind passes of tillage in 2024. We did not in 2023 on our Colorado farm here. The only thing we plan on doing, we currently don't grow any soybeans in Colorado. Nobody does in our area. We're not sure why, but we're gonna next year, if for nothing else, to start building that file. Like I said, that's an incredibly key piece of the technology is you know, the more information they can collect and the more accurate we can get our files, the better it's going to work for everybody.
Yeah. All right. So, Jack, I know we were talking with Barry yesterday. He said that you potentially might be moving it to Iowa. You kind of interested in bringing that zapper down? Sorry, that laser down to you or and everything, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously that would be the goal right now. We it just the size of it and the speed of it wouldn't make a dent in the acres we're trying to cover. But we yeah, the big picture long-term goal is to have them on our farm here in Iowa. And we've been running John Deere autonomous tractor here a few years on just fall and spring tillage. And we really see that as a tool that we can pair with this laser weeder, because like Barry was saying, how, you know, you need a good Netflix account because there's not a whole lot to do. Well, it would be super awesome to not even have to pay someone to sit in the cab of a tractor if you can autonomously just laser weed, which in Iowa we don't have any laws against running autonomous equipment like they do in some other states. So I would just add that on there. We've been working with John Deere on the autonomous side, and them two tools paired together would solve a lot of weed and labor problems that we have.
All right, thank you. And then kind of back, I know Barry kind of mentioned that, and then with you, Matthew, on, tell us about, because talking about equipment, it can be expensive and everything and whatnot, and the expense, like, I'm gonna try and it might not work out for. Can you tell us about the process you went in acquiring your weed zapper?
Yeah, it's easy to spend a lot of money in farming, and it's easy to spend a lot of money in organic farming because there's always new tools. And I haven't come across a silver bullet yet that solves all of it. So for us on the weed zapper, we spent a couple of years. This is our 4th season around a weed zapper, but for the first couple of years, we had neighbors who have a custom business, and so we hired custom. We watched other people use them, and then spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out if there was a return on investment to purchase it for ourselves. And like a lot of other farmers, we rely heavily on hand weeding to do kind of the final cleanup pass. And so in 2020, with immigration challenges, and our H2A crews for hand weeding were unavailable, and so we didn't have any hand labor for weeding that we typically do. And then in 2023, the professional crews, third-party H2A crews that we hire, the average cost is about $43 per hour per person. So between sort of observing and hiring custom, having challenges getting access to hand labor, and then it becoming increasingly expensive, that's sort of the components that added up to us deciding to make the investment in a weed zapper for ourselves. My point to a lot of folks who are maybe getting started in organics, where their whole operation isn't committed to that, or there's lots of competing needs in a farm financially, and so if it doesn't necessarily make sense to make that big capital outlay, there's lots of other ways to get access to technology, be it a high-speed planter with all the latest tech, or yield maps, or GPS, or weed zapper. And so I'd really recommend folks to think about begging, borrowing, or stealing as much as possible before you make the commitment. And so if you have a neighbor that has technology that you'd like to try out, say, for example, a high-speed planter with all the latest and greatest attachments, typically, you're going to be planting a couple weeks later than they will if they're a conventional farmer. See if you can exchange labor there. Or if there's another organic farmer in the neighborhood that has a weed zapper, see if you can hire them, or barter, cultivator time and sit in their tractors and run the cultivators, and then learn how to run the zapper and trade it that way. So, and a final option would be to start your own custom business. So if it's difficult to justify the expense on your own per acre cost, it might be worthwhile seeing if there's a market for a custom operation to justify that capital expense. So for us, it took a couple of years to make the commitment, and a lot of it was related to labor and using this in conjunction with hand weeding. We won't go away from hand weeding entirely, but I think this will be sort of a complementary tool in that final cleanup pass.
All right, thank you. And kind of just throwing this out there, but kind of what is like the most important technology used for weed management? I know we kind of talked on a couple different things here, but what would you say if you had to name one thing, if it's just plain old iron, management styles, zapper, laser weeder, what would you say is going to be your most important weed management strategy that you just cannot live without? I'm going to put you on the spot here, Chris, for you have any, what would you say? Is it that arrow weeder you have or something else they just haven't mentioned yet?
I mean, I would probably sit more in Matthew's camp. There's really no silver bullet, and I think every farm is somewhat unique in what they're battling, what the different, maybe what their core challenge is. To me, I think it's I think making sure that you're biting off what you can chew is really important in organics. And if you can do 50 acres really, really well, it's better than doing 100 acres, average. And I think, being out there at the right times is really it. You have to be out there. You have to be out there consistently, or you have to, maybe this laser weeder will be the silver bullet. I don't know, but we've got all the other tools, I think, that were described in this call, and not one of them, it solves all the problems every year.
Yeah. So basically, the most important technology is the farmer themselves. Is kind of what you're saying. It's
yep.
Mm-hmm.
And the eye to make that right decision and have that right strategy at the right time. I mean, I think experience is super valuable too, just in knowing what tool to use when.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know there's one thing that just popped up here in the chat. I know we kind of talked about it. We haven't talked about it's also a common practice. Flame meters. And you want to chime in on use of flame meters? Flame. Yes.
Yeah, this is Barry. I wanted to address the flaming thing. We do flame, and I think flaming is a great tool. It seems like we struggle with precision in the flaming, which I don't think has to be that way. Again, for us, we're looking at the laser weeder taking care of that 6 to 8 inches in the row, and a flame weeder taking care of everything else. So maybe we have some sort of camera controlled guidance on each side of the crop that shields the crop so it never gets any flame, and you flame the rest of the ground. And it opens a lot of potential no-till options where you never have to do any tillage. But clearly fire is very effective on killing weeds. So again, I think the flamer has a lot of potential, and it is something we use every year.
Matthew, you said you use as well. You want to add?
Yeah, we flame weeders have been part of our farm maybe for 15 years. So we're big believers of it, especially here in Minnesota. June can be wet. It hasn't been the last couple of years. So it's easy to be an organic farmer in a drought. But when it's wet, like in 2019, and we weren't able to, I think we had 6 or 7 suitable working days in June to do weed control. You're not going to be able to do everything you need to. So for us, they can be a rescue tool in a disaster situation, or used appropriately, very early, they can also be a helpful tool to get those in row weeds. We use it exclusively on corn. We haven't done much in terms of flaming with soybeans. I've seen some stuff online of other operations trying that, and that's something to be interested to learn more about if other folks have.
All right, thank you. And again, anyone else, if you want to jump in that, you're more than welcome to do it. I'll just kind of throw us out there and whatnot. What is one weed management strategy that you wish you implemented sooner, and why?
I'll jump in. I think we've started to take part of our rotation and just plant late. I mean, I think especially if you have certain fields that are problem fields, we'll just plant June 5th instead of May 20th. And that a lot of times eliminates, 80% of our weed problems.
All right, thank you. Another one, say that came in here. I think you kind of touched on it, but question came in. What about farmers that don't have the big acres and everything that can't afford like the laser? I know you touched on this a little bit, Matthew. How would you kind of encourage them to maybe reach out to some of this stuff? I know you mentioned like the neighbors and everything, but anything else you could kind of help along with that?
This is a little bit related. One of the resources that's totally free that I think is really helpful is YouTube and Twitter. I get a lot of enjoyment watching Fehr's. You guys have a great organic channel. I think Century Farms Organics is also on this call. They've got a great YouTube channel. There are a couple of pretty active Facebook groups, and then there's like the O-Grain listserv. So there's online free resources, including, Practical Farmers of Iowa, Albert Lee Seed House's, previous conferences. There's a lot of resources online to just learn some of these management practices, see what other people are doing. Obviously, the best way to learn is to talk to another farmer. And so a little bit reading between the lines on your question, Ty, if you don't have a neighbor, that's a good way to get connected. In terms of getting access to those expensive tools, I do think cooperative efforts, if you can share with neighbors, or that custom business component might be one way to make that more accessible. A good partner and a banker is important, I think, in farming.
All right, thank you. And go ahead, Barry.
No, I was just going to say, I think my parents' strategy for the small farm was just have lots of kids, and helps with the labor shortage problem, and can clean up a field short matter of time. They're not cheap now that I have my own, but it's one way to get started.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I spent many summers going out there rock picking and everything, and yeah, that's on that. They're a great resource to have. Jack, anything outside of key technology strategy outside of weed management that you think have had a big impact on your operation?
Yeah, no. I mean, a lot of people know a lot more and have done it a lot longer than I have, but definitely like the John Deere, my ops center, and RTK have been a huge part in our operation, just keeping track of all the acres. But no, yeah, there's no silver bullet to it all. It's just the right thing at the right time. I think there is being more and more tools developed, like the laser weeder and the autonomous equipment, that is going to make that a lot easier for for farmers, and hopefully will be available to the small farmers as well.
All right, thank you. All right, one here. So one other thing here, kind of just gonna throw this out here as well. Feel free, any one of you, to kind of talk about. I know what is one lesson that you've learned so far that you wish you learned sooner? Like, a lot of people is a trial by error, but one thing is like, I wish I knew this sooner of a new piece of technology or just some common practice. What would you guys say would be the one lesson that you learned that you want to pass on to others so they don't have to learn it the hard way like you did?
I think for someone starting out, Chris had some excellent advice. When you switch from conventional to organic, patience in planting is probably one of the biggest potential, changes that you have to get used to doing, just because, it's a different way of farming and you have different options.
I'd say a lesson that we kind of relearn every year is the replant question. This is building off of Barry's point. This year, our last field that we planted was a field of navy beans, and we were having some planter problems. And so a field that should have taken maybe 1 or 2 days to plant ended up taking about 6 or 7 to plant. And by the time we got to day 6 and 7 finishing, covered in sweat and dirt and grease and swear words, we should have gone back and torn up the first 2 days of planting and redone it. But it was like the end of the season. You're tired. You got a whole bunch of weeds coming. You got a whole bunch of other stuff to do. So it's probably a call that I get every spring from another farmer buddy somewhere that's coming across the same problem, and we run into it every year. So the lesson we keep relearning is, if you think you should replant, do it. We've never regretted replanting.
You got some there, Chris, or?
I was just gonna kind of echo a little bit along the same lines. I think, that planning window it sets you up for success or failure. So that to me is probably the most important single variable, is just, you have to plant at the right time. You have to have the field prepped in the right way. And we just changed corn planters this last spring, and I wish we would have changed 5 or 10 years sooner, because we were running 20-year-old planter technology, and it's unbelievable the difference there. So I think there's constantly things to learn, and I think just trying to keep those experiences from year to year and build upon them, I think is what builds that long-term success. You're going to continue to have unique years, and you're going to constantly be humbled. You can have successes, but every year's kind of has its own wrinkle, and it's really trying to build on those experiences over time, and then hopefully pass that forward. There's a tremendous value in that.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and I was just I apologize. I thank you for reminding me, Matthew, when we discussed in our little proof for this, you mentioned planner tech. Can you expand on that, please, and kind of?
Yeah, I could even. So we switched from an older Kinsey to a 2023 case, this 12-row 30-inch, but it had the hydraulic down pressure. I think the biggest thing for us was just having a consistent depth. You know, that changed emergence patterns, and it allowed our blind passes to be that much more successful. Whereas in the past, and then also just singulation being, you know, basically almost perfect. With the new planter, you get an even canopy, you get even shading, and then you get the most successful environment for that corn plant to yield. So, you know, if you're a small farmer and you have a neighbor with a brand new planter, or, you know, somebody that's willing to custom, that has newer technology, that's worth every penny to have them, you know, to buy in that technology in any way that you can on that side, if you can't make that investment yourself.
All right, thank you. So we can go through some questions here that we've had through the kind of been picking through too, but we'll go a little bit more here. Seems like the zapper has been kind of the hot topic at the moment here. Kind of my little knowledge with the zapper and everything is, how would you describe as the best way to go about so you can get the most success out of using a weed zapper? Is it timing? Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe if you go back to that zapping slide, we can talk a little bit about it. Before we got our zapper, like I had mentioned, we had a number of different operations, neighbors and a custom operation do zapping for us. So we've seen it. This is an old school manufacturing weed zapper. I know there's a couple of different manufacturers, but this is a company based out of Missouri. And the model we were running was a 2022, I believe. So each year it seems like the technology behind it, so the programming and the generator and some of the wiring components change. So year to year and manufacturer, there's differences. So I want to be really specific about that. We got our zapper kind of middle of July, probably slightly too late, in that we could have been out a little bit sooner. But what you can see here in this photo is kind of the first couple of days of us getting out and zapping. And then we zapped up until we couldn't get through, and the crop was getting run over, either just because of the canopy or plant height. So that was probably into the middle of August. And so most fields got 2 passes with maybe a 2 to 3 week gap in between those passes. One of the things that we found a limit to this is variety selections. So this field that we're looking at has an Albert Lee seed house, 1718 crop, soybean planted maybe June 1st or so. And across the road was another field of 1518s. And the next day we weren't able to go in the 1518 field just because of the bushiness of that variety, and the crop height was that much different that it was creating issues with the track machine. So I think if you're integrating a weed zapper into your field, you're going to want to be conscientious about variety selection. Plant height is a consideration. Of course, you need to balance that with full canopy for weed control and competing with weeds. So something to look for anybody that's running one. Were there any kind of specific questions? I'll just go on mute.
Yeah, while I'm looking at that, Chris, you want to talk about the your arrow reader 1%? Oh, I think you answered that there. You want to expand that a little bit more then, Chris?
Sure. I mean,
Sorry.
we typically have only used that tool on corn. Corn, you have the advantage of being able to plant deeper than soybeans typically. And that just gives you a slightly larger window in which you can use that tool. It is a fairly aggressive tool, so you're doing a lot of soil movement. And with corn, those tines are typically 3/4 to an inch deep, where they're reaching down to and lifting. And with soybeans, if you've got them planted, 1.5 to 2 inches deep, they germ and get going. There's a pretty narrow window in there where you could run it and not start hooking that plant and dislodging it. With that said, we really haven't tried to use it on beads either. So yeah.
All right, thank you. Another one on zapping here. Jacob said he planned to zapping and weed changes in dairy in Wisconsin, and he said that their ragweed is getting selectively bred to be shorter and woodier stalks from a lot of years of zapping. Have Barry or Matthew, have you guys seen this as well, or any thoughts on that?
I've never ran a weed zapper, so I don't have any thoughts on it.
We haven't, but if there's shorter giant ragweed, then we may have to come up with a different name for it, like shorty ragweed or something. So we can come up with some more tools for that. There's a question here. We do run 2 passes with this so far. We may implement a 3rd pass. May try and get a little bit sooner. It's always easy to put your cleanest field on the photo in the presentation. Not all the fields are this clean, and not all the places look like this. So, just a note of honesty and transparency on that. Do you see weeds changing to shorter stature? What I would say is where the weed zapper maybe was limited was with some lamb's quarter, depending on the robustness of the plant that it was touching. The contact may have been a partial kill. And so what we did see in certain circumstances was the weed zapper would kill the top half of a plant. And weeds are resilient, as all organic farmers know. And so what we came across was later in the season, after the field was too big to transport through, we were finding lamb's quarter that had bushed out vertically. So the weeds were still growing. So that's where I think it's not a silver bullet. It needs to be paired with other good weed management practices before, and then potentially, hand weeding as a final cleanup pass to catch those errant weeds that maybe are sneaking through.
I don't know if that dairy farm was referring to us, but we have seen our ragweed get selectively seem to be getting shorter, and we are having less kill efficiency on our weed zapping passes. It's a little bit of a small sample size though too, because 2 out of the last 3 years we've had extremely dry conditions, and I think that tends to lead to less effective kills than when that ragweed stock is full of basically juice and fluids and can get vaporized, versus being a little bit woodier, a little bit drier. It just doesn't kill as well. So nature's going to evolve, and it would make sense that would be the evolution on weed zappers to try to stay below those canopies. On the flip side, if you have a ragweed that's staying somewhat below the soybean canopy, most of the time, then you're also not seeing probably as significant a yield drag from that either. So.
All right, thank you. All right, now we're just going to start wrapping this thing up. I just want to go through each and every one of you. What do you think the next big weed management strategy? Is it going to be new technology? Is it going to be a planning tool? What do you think or what you wish you had access to right now that you see could be possible coming next 5, 10, 15 years. And we'll start off with Barry there.
Sure. So I guess for me, I sent a picture to my nephews of the new soybean yield record, 206 bushel an acre, I believe it was. So I'm kind of just waiting for Albert Lee to give us the proper variety and tools, and we'll be good to go.
All right, well, I'll let Matt and Jake know that, get on that so we can get that for the next 5 years or so. So we'll get them working on that. And then we'll just go. Jack, you want to chime in with your?
Yeah, no. I mean, we're already kind of seeing it. The technology part, I think that's definitely going to continue to advance, and just super excited to see see how we can raise higher yields and work less. That's what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, spend more time with the family and everything. It seems like all this stuff is. You just think back when your grandparents, they were out there with horses and mules and just working 40 acres, and it felt like a lot of work from them. Now people have 5,000 and still doing the same amount of time. So yeah, Chris.
I mean, I think automation, autonomous tractors, equipment is going to be, over the next 10 to 20 years will be, a huge evolution in agriculture, and specifically organic agriculture, given that there's still a fairly high need for machinery and equipment. So, I think there may be a lot of iterations of that, but I think that'll be a huge change.
All right, and now to bring it all home and everything, why don't you tell us exactly what we need to know to expect the next 5, 10, 15 years, Matthew?
No pressure. I think I'd be watching what the fruit and vegetable growers are doing out in the Central Valleys, right? I think that already Jack and Barry have proven that point out, that our industry is probably most similar to theirs in terms of a specialty niche crop. So autonomous trends, access to labor, more and more extreme climate events, and then consolidation. So I think those trends that we see in the fruit and veggie worlds are probably the most analogous to our especially grain worlds. So just kind of observing any of those different trends.